welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of a great number of fascinating books about the science of the mind and human emotion. We are here to talk about one in particular that I have already found to be extraordinarily helpful and life-changing as a lifelong overthinker. And I'm so excited for this conversation. Welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Of course, Jen. I'm Donna Jackson Nakazawa. I'm a science journalist and writer, and I do write about the neuroscience of human emotion. And this book that's out now is called Mind Drama: The Science of Rumination and How to Outwit Your Inner Defeatist. And in it, I dove into the latest cutting edge science on what we know about rumination, why we do it, how we're doing it more today than we ever have before, the upsides and the downsides, and really, more than anything, how the new science on what areas of the brain give rise to this very, very human and troubling habit can tell us about how to also exit our thought spirals.
It's so helpful so far. And before we get, if you want to say before we start to chew over rumination itself, perhaps, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your career in science journalism, how your interest in neurobiology and emotion came about, and how it led you to this project and your other projects.
Well, many years ago, I was an undergrad at Duke, and I went crying to my dean one day, and I said, I just can't fit in all these courses that I want to take. And I was so immersed in public policy and looking at epidemiology, and also fascinated, of course, by language and the written word. And I was an English lit major, and then I was also a writing major, and then I was also a public policy. And so I found myself doing projects like immersing myself in a home for adolescent girls and writing features about it and writing for the school newspaper. And she just said to me, let it be. Let's do an interdisciplinary major. Take what you need, take what you want, and let's see what happens. And I ended up at the Radcliffe, now Columbia program in publishing. And somehow I think my DNA had a little bit to do with it, because I grew up in a newspaper family on my father's side, and my grandfather on my mother's side, and everyone on her side, they were NIH neurobiologists. So all those things shaped me in the way that all of our life events and experiences shape us. Landed in the world of New York journalism, cut my teeth there in the world of New York magazines, and just found my place over time, writing articles, features, books, interviewing neuroscientists, and trying to translate it in a way that we can shorten the time between what they know and what we need in our living room.
Mm. I love that point that you make because I was a former academic myself, and one of the things I used to get really frustrated about was the length of time it took for the stuff that I was talking about in the classes that I was both taking and teaching to get out to the general public. And so I really appreciate the role of, let's say, popularizers in getting information out to the public. What are your approaches for making science accessible? I imagine that scientific reports are very difficult to read, and there are a lot of them, and some of them contradict each other, I imagine. How do you
Yes.
take all of the things that you find and boil it down to its essence?
Well, I think that I love a good gnarly study. I really have been known to get out. I'm very analog, and I'll get out one of those big poster boards, sometimes the three-paneled poster boards that kids use for science experiments. I'll get out my post-it notes, my Sharpies, my highlighters, And like, take 4 or 5 studies that sort of contradict each other or seem to influence each other or be parts of a whole, even if the researchers themselves have never spoken to each other or dialogued with each other in any meaningful way. And what happens when I do that, it's almost like if you've ever made word pictures, where you take a word and then you do a little shoot off of it and you create more words and thoughts. And what ends up happening is that when you take all of the best thinking that's coming out of various silos across psychology, psychiatry, immunology, neurology, neuroscience, you start to see patterns because we live in patterns across time. We can see that if we look back at eras, just ask Taylor Swift and her Eras tour, like we see patterns emerge at various times, not just in our own lives, but as a culture. And these patterns are influenced by science and literature. And to look at that from a meta level and diagram it out, dive into it, walk around, tearing my hair out, sitting in my attic office, thinking, I think this means X is a really lovely part of what I do. And then it's a matter of picking up the phone and having the good fortune to be able to talk to our leading neuroscientists around the world and just say, hey, I want to run this by you. See what he's doing, see what she's doing, see what's happening here. I think it means X. Am I nuts? And then to hear, no, no, yes, that is something. So then it's a matter of taking it and blending story and being a true communicator. I am a communicator. I'm not a scientist. I understand. I love gnarly science. My agent often says to me, oh, this is another gnarly problem that you're gonna love to, when I tell her I want to write about something, it's always gnarly, it's always complicated, it's always intellectual, but it can be softened in a way that makes sense in our day-to-day lived experience. Because look, we are walking around in a fire hose of unending drama and rage and news and big emotion. Our nervous systems are running really, really hot all the time right now. And the more that we can do to intervene with soft story that delivers hard, actionable answers, I think that I'm lucky to have this job.
That's really, really interesting. And I wonder too, what is the role of, you talk about blending story with the research and the hard evidence. I was so taken by your use of the phrase, one part research and one part me search. So some of those narratives are your own. Uh,
Sure.
I'm curious about the role of telling your own story in presenting the research, as well as if, like, in synthesizing all of that, if you've gained any, insight, accidental or whatever, along the way into your own experiences while writing the research down.
Well, sure. So, a big part of what interested me about rumination, and indeed any book that I'm writing, is that it feels resonant in my own experience. And it's not that I ever walk around thinking, oh, I'm just like everyone. We're all so divergent, like we're all different. Our stories are different. But I have learned over 30 years as a science journal that there are things that unite us absolutely universally. And one of those things really spoke to me when I began to look at the science on rumination. Number one, we're doing it more than we ever have before, and that's a problem because it is the largest risk factor for anxiety, depression, eating disorders, substance use disorders, and PTSD. So that really interested me a lot. It's always we ruminate about the same things. You may be thinking about the conversation you had with your teenager last night and what you're going to say. I may be thinking about the snarky comment that, a sibling made over the weekend. And my husband might be thinking about some, employee who, is causing a drama and workplace drama, which is always mind drama, right? So, but we're all really focused on the same thing, the same question, and that is whether or not we have a sense of belonging and safety with the people and the places that matter most to us. We all get caught in the same spiraling, that negative, repetitive thinking we can't turn off, in which we kind of replay what happened and we future cast into what might happen next. And another universality is that we become really self-derogatory. Our ruminations always spit up a story in which the beliefs we have about ourselves are negative and far harsher than we could ever deserve. And so that just moves me to think that we're all walking around doing that. And then how it ties to my own story is that we underwent a family tragedy when I was 12. And there were a lot of changes in my life at that time. And I sort of went from being a bit of a loquacious child, according to my teachers, to a really solitary and silent kid. And a lot of rumination went forth in my mind because we know that these patterns for rumination are set up early in life often, and often in response to adversity. And for all of us, it's a way of trying to make meaning out of what's happening around us. Unfortunately, rumination is a survival response that's trying to protect you, but it is a survival response gone wrong. Our brain gets us into it very easily. It's a slippery slope because of the way the brain works in the area that gives rise to our ruminations. But we have no skills for getting out of rumination. And so for me, I saw that pattern in my own life, that story of voicelessness, of, hey, my voice doesn't matter. No one wants to hear what I have to say. And then taking the latest neuroscience in the brain and putting that together with what I developed in the book, which I'm sure you're aware of, called the MIST framework, to help people exit rumination in very quick order based on the latest that we know from fMRI scans and epidemiological research. And of course, I have the advantage of working with the top neuroscientists in the world to make sure that what I think is actually what works.
That technique is truly, revolutionary. I was practicing it over the course of reading your book as it came up at work and in my personal life and all that sort of stuff. And I really found that it's sort of, I don't want to say instantaneous, but there is like a sort of real quickness to distancing yourself from that story that you are telling over and over and over in your head, just taking that little step back, that little inch of breathing room that you get, really does help a lot in the moment.
Oh, I'm so glad. And that really is going back to like that, science project, like, triptych white panel, white board, where I was like, wait, this study shows this, and putting together multiple pieces of neuroscience in a way that then when I ran it by a neuroscientist I respect a lot, she said, why didn't anyone think of this before? Like, it really works. It's just a matter of bringing the language to describe how we can play with the brain in ways that serve us and get us out of those reels that we serve up over and over and over. And we all know what they are in our lives, right? That thing that you can't stop thinking about today, and you go home and you make dinner and you're like, did I add the salt to the recipe? Who knows? Because I'm still replaying this thing that happened last week.
I'd love if you could talk a little bit about the default network, the neural default network that's at the center of what happens when we begin to ruminate. The way that you broke it down into the sort of the bodily experience, the intellectual or the thought, cognitive, whatever you want to call it, experience, and the emotional one really made what can just seem like a wall of loud noise, of chaos. When you can
Yes.
see it in its constituent parts, it makes it a lot less intimidating.
Well, so I want to just emphasize for people that rumination is always a signal fire from your past. It is always asking you to deal with unprocessed emotions And we think that we're ruminating because we're going to get the big answer. It's very seductive, right? It draws you in over and over. And that's part of how the brain works. Same neural grooves just get you going. And it's seductive emotionally and intellectually because we think the more I think, the better closer I'm going to come to an answer. But in fact, relief never comes. The answer never, ever comes. And that is because of the way that the area that gives rise to our ruminations works. And it is called the default mode network. And it is a network indeed. It's of three areas, one at the front, one on the side, and one at the back of the brain that work together and fire and wire together across a lifetime, full of our self-referential stories, right? Like, oh, what do they think of me? Or how did I mess that up? Or gosh, I screwed that up. And also, like, what a jerk he is, right? It's really good at those stories which frame us in the center of the universe. And one area gives rise to, and this is part of the MIST framework. MIST is an acronym for a very quick way to exit rumination. And of course, when we're ruminating, we're lost in a fog. So MIST works. One area of the default mode network gives rise to the mental movies that we've seen 1,000 times before, and they constantly replay a story which tells us something often very negative about ourselves. And one area gives rise to the intense interior emotion, that's for I, and those are emotions which kind of play up the emotions around those mental movies, almost like a score in a film will really agitate you one way or another. They kind of add the agitation, the emotional agitation. And then the third area is so interesting to me. It gives rise to the somatic sensations or physical sensations that cause us to clutch somewhere in our body or to contract in a way that makes us feel as if that thing that happened 25 years ago, 50 years ago, or 2 minutes ago is still happening right now. Your brain actually can't tell the difference between something that happened way back when and something that's happening right now. You still get the same cascade of physical clutching and hormones and chemicals that aren't good for us over time. So T in the MIST framework is for tying it all together in a way that acknowledges the story. Because here's the other thing about rumination. It's so seductive. You think you're going to find the answer, you don't. But guess what you're also doing, Jen? You are suppressing and avoiding what you truly feel. And rumination is your brain's way of trying to get you to acknowledge the feelings that you are repressing and avoiding. And so what MIST does, it handles all of that in about 1 minute and allows you to name the story, seeing the story is an answer because it helps you to see that you're caught in a loop you don't want to be caught in. And it also allows you to stop suppressing what it is that your brain is calling on you to hear and tend to in that most compassionate part of yourself. And what this does is literally in the brain, it's not just, motivational, psychological marshmallow fluff. This is real fMRI neuroscience. The brain, the default mode network, goes from its lockdown state of story spitting and self-derogation and other judging. It stops locking down. When we're caught in negative rumination, the default mode network is on a closed circuit. It's spinning real hard and real fast. Think of it like an angry cyclone. But when we do the MIST framework, the default mode network stops being a closed circuit and it lights up and interconnects with 267 task positive areas of the brain. It flips from being the villain of the brain to being the hero of the brain. And we light up with creativity, problem solving answers. So when you describe that as you practice the MIST framework, your problem seems a little bit outside of you. That is everything because that is your brain lighting up and going, hey, Jen, you've been caught in this story for a couple hours now while you're doing the dishes and cleaning the house. This story isn't true.
Mhm.
It's not real. It's very old. Can you hold it tenderly and acknowledge it? And from here, can you ask yourself, what do you need? What do you need to do? Do you need to voice yourself? Do you need to acknowledge these emotions? Do you need to acknowledge that this part of the story isn't true? What do we need to do now? Do you need to go in your body and let some of this tension out? And of course, I think, 150 different strategies for how to go ahead and optimize the MIST framework for real healing.
All of that research is so fascinating and how it really illuminates what can feel like in the moment, like a completely overwhelming and indescribable experience, because it is so overwhelming and it can feel like it's taking over all of your senses when it's happening.
Because it does.
Yeah.
Because it does. It literally hijacks the whole brain. And I do want to say, we all ruminate. We're ruminating more than we ever have before. But I want you to know it is not a character flaw. We think of it as a character flaw, but it is a very human part of our experience. And it separates us from animals, right? It's how you are literally here today. Your gene pool is alive on the planet. Rumination is a way of detecting threat and avoiding threat. It's just as I said, it is a survival response run amok.
Mhm. Well, what is next for you? I know that you are probably deep in promoting this book right now, but is there a project that is sort of, coming, cohering sort of in the background as you do this?
100%. I am a veteran long form writer. I write long form. It's my favorite way of writing. And by the time I've turned a book in to my beloved editor at Penguin Random House, there is a long ramp up until publication, and that takes 11 or 12 months. And it is a busy time because I also lecture at universities and schools and behavioral health organizations and corporations. So there's a lot of lecturing going on, but I like to write. And so, yes, indeed, I'm about 100 pages into my next book. And that's always a lot of fun because it grounds me. And as much as I love conversations on book tour, I'm a writer. I like to write. And I don't really feel like I'm fully myself if I'm not writing.
I deeply appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule, especially if you are lecturing. Yeah, this is a busy time of year when so thank you and good luck with the next project. And I am so excited to recommend this to, frankly, everybody at the library. We were talking before we started recording that most librarians are in fact ruminators. So this will be, yeah, good HR.
Well, that sounds great. And remember, most workplace trauma is mind trauma. So thank you for having me, Jen. It's been a great pleasure. I'm a great lover of libraries, so it meant a lot to me to do this.
Well, you're absolutely welcome and thank you. Listeners, please check out Mind Drama, The Science of Rumination, and How to Outwit Your Inner Defeatist. It is out now as we talk, and it will continue to be out as you hear this in a few weeks. Thank you so much for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.